The wisdom and experience of Robert Craddock on a Monday. Hello to you, Crash.
G'day, Gerard. Yeah, it was quite a weekend, wasn't it? I must admit, I never thought I'd see Sri Lanka towelled up like that at home soil, and that's why I'm not quite as bullish as you about what it all means. It was terrific. The selectors have had a wonderful couple of months, but I just feel a pressure tested against a really good team, and India's gone now. But the Ashes will still be interesting next summer. I can see a few twists and turns ahead.
I like the twists and turns ahead is probably my point. Is it doesn't have to be just the same 11 trotted out time after time. See, I ignored your counsel in Perth, and I've learnt a serious lesson from that, Crash. Don't ignore the wisdom and experience. That's the whole point. But I would drop Marnus for this next test match, and I'd give Constas the test in Sri Lanka. I reckon they were spot on with what they did for this test match, and now I'd give the youngster a look at it because Marnus is not in great form. Go away, find your form. You'll be there for the test championship, but we think there's a greater worth. That's all. I just think break the nexus of axings and droppings and go, hey, we're just going to pick the guys who are in form, we're going to play them, and you go back and figure it out, and you'll be back in no time.
Yeah, it's one of those ones, when you're winning, you can do that sort of thing. Like, I must admit, I would have played Constas in the first test, and this sounds like such a ridiculous statement, but even though Inglis has made a century on debut, I still feel Australia would have been better off long-term playing Constas because you just can't buy this experience. You know, he's going to be there in a couple of years when Australia's playing India over a grueling 4 or 5 test summer in India. And whereas Inglis, he was terrific, but will he be another Martin Love? Martin Love's last test he had a century in it. So yes. He scored a century and never played again. Now, that won't happen to Inglis. He will play this week. But what I am enjoying, though, is the interesting debate over selection in the World Test Championship final in England in a couple of months against South Africa. Because what do you do, Gerard? Like, do you keep Inglis in the team? Cameron Green will be there, but he's going to be as a batsman only. Is that good enough to put Bo Webster out of the team? So there's a lot to think about for Australia. But it's, as you said, it's depth there now, and they've got alternatives, which they didn't seem to have. But as you said, they were hiding in plain sight, weren't they?
I think they were. Hey, there's something exotic about seeing an Australian team with 3 spinners in it. And I love that Kuhnemann took the new ball and he got a wicket straight away. And at the end of the test match, he sort of further emphasises it's a tricky craft, what he does. It makes him a unique proposition. It makes him such a valuable proposition.
Oh, an extraordinary story, Gerard. I've spoken to the doctors who operated on his broken finger, and they said when he arrived at the St Andrews Hospital after breaking his finger when in a return catch from Matt Wade in a Big Bash game, and Steve Fredrickson, the surgeon, was in the crowd. He saw it. He went there. Like, Kuhnemann was shattered, and they didn't sugarcoat it at all. Like, they felt right there and right then he would not go and play in Sri Lanka. Now, they're quite stunned, the medical staff, that he got to Sri Lanka and he's even playing, never mind taking 9 wickets. So it's an extraordinary effort. And you know what? Even though he's fought through the distractions of having a broken finger on his non-bowling hand, to subtly change his modus operandi as a bowler, this is what I love. He's flighting the ball better than he did in India a couple of years ago. He got a couple of beautiful stumpings, and gee, he looked good. And it's enchanting, Gerard, because we've never had a long-lasting left-arm spinner in Australian cricket history who's taken more than Jack Saunders' 79 wickets, and he took that a century ago.
Yes.
New Zealand have had Dan Vettori, who's taken 10 million wickets, and there's Jadeja in India and Derek Underwood in England, but where dear old Jack, who died in Toorak, age 52, I think he was, all those years ago, he's still our record holder as a left-arm spinner. And that's why George Bailey was very right in A, selecting Kuhnemann, but B, basically having a public advertisement saying, we are interested in left-arm bowlers. If you like this skill and you feel you're good at it, please step forward.
Yes.
It was, and we just, so Kuhnemann fills that gap. He's a wonderfully positive young fella, and to see him rise from that hospital bed where his finger was in agony, his Sri Lankan dream was in tatters, to take 9 wickets 2 weeks later, it's an extraordinary story.
It's great for his trajectory and it's great for his status. So I was curious about the pecking order, and I was told the pecking order was clearly Kuhnemann 2 and Murphy 3. If there were 2 spinners to be played, it would be Kuhnemann because of what he brought. It has me wondering long term, who will the successor on Australian shores be when Nathan Lyon calls it a day?
Really good question. Lyon's so unique, isn't he? Because he gets up over the ball and has topspin, which gives him bounce, and he's just in his own stratosphere. So, look, you would probably take a left armour ahead of a right armour because they at least turn the ball away from the right-handed batsman. But it is an open field. It really is. No one really sees the mantle from, as we said, over the years, Australia's had Ray Bright, the left armour, who played, a reasonable amount of tests, but he had quite a hefty bowling average. And with right arm finger spin, Tim May bobbed in, didn't he? And he was very crafty and useful. He used to put a whole lot of work on the ball. But apart, Lyon's floating in his own hemisphere. It's up for grabs. It really is. Right here, right now, I would probably say Kuhnemann for that specific skill of turning the ball away from the right armour. And the fact that he's flighting it now with just that little bit of loop, I think really brings another dimension to his bowling.
And to bang an old drum that we both believe in, to watch that test match is to talk to New South Wales cricket officials and say, make the SCG a spinner's paradise, a raging turner, so that every time Australia plays there, it has to play 2 spinners. It would be so good for cricket in this country, for the development of our spinners. Instead of the dung heap that they serve up year after year, take it back. Take it back to the raging turner from the start and let Australia demand that Australia play multiple spinners, and every other state that goes there. Every time you go, you play 2 spinners. How good would that be for the craft?
Oh, yeah. Well, Gerard, I'm so glad you raised that because it gives me the chance to focus on a little chat I had to Steve O'Keefe, the left-arm spinner, who is in Galle leading a tour at the moment. And he said, I'd actually go a step further and have in the lead up to this Indian tour in 2 years' time, where, let's remind ourselves, Australia's won 1 tour in 50 years in India because it doesn't practice on spinning decks, why not have each Sheffield Shield team has 1 game in the bush per annum? And he said, it's all bets are off cricket. It's a dusty turner. You're playing 3 spinners. That's your choice. Should you play 2 or 3? You're opening the bowling with a spinner. And the highest total in the game is 210 scored by the team in the first innings, and then it's 170. Like, make it real. He said, take us to Chennai, take us to these venues. He said, because we think, and he said, that's what you're facing. He said, it's hard for a spinner to get used to bowling with the new ball, like as Kuhnemann did and did so well. But I agree with him. Just be inventive, for goodness sakes. And if it's not at the SCG, and I used to love the way the SCG used to make spinners feel good about themselves. Because it was the last test of the summer, you'd have Bob Holland or Murray Bennett or Trevor Hones or Peter Sleep might have had a tough old season, but when they got to Sydney, they'd take, a nice little bag full. And the same as Sheffield Shield bowlers, they would tidy up their averages. Spinners would go there and they'd know they would be kings for 3 or 4 days. It was wonderful. If New South Wales won the toss, Greg Matthews, the off-spinner, would storm around the dressing room saying, this will be a 3-dayer, this will be a 3-dayer. and it often was. So I agree with you. More spinning decks in Australia.
Do you think the same 11 will play the second test crash as just was so immensely victorious?
Well, yeah, I would lean that way. What I'm really interested in, will they play on the same deck? That hasn't been addressed. Because if I was Sri Lanka, I probably would, because I think that's our only chance of having, as ordinary as their spinners were, weren't they, Gerard? And do you know what? The Sri Lankan spinners, Jayasuriya and these guys, I don't like the way they bowl off 2 steps. And maybe I'm being simplistic about it, but Kuhnemann jogged to the wicket, and in that jog there was a certain force of his body language, and also his torso was on the move. These guys that take 2 steps and then tweak it down, there seemed to be no work on the ball, no fizz, no pump, So, God, they were ordinary, weren't they? Jeffrey Van der Sar and the likes. Wow, I know Australia did brilliantly, and they deserve all the praise, but that's as flat an effort as we've ever seen from Sri Lanka. But, Gerard, there's one last thing I want to say. I've always felt, and we said it in the preview, that since Shane Warne was handed the ball from Alan Border and he had his first great results in tests in Sri Lanka and pulled a victory out of nowhere, Sri Lanka has only ever won 5 tests against Australia, 3 of them in one series. And I still reckon, if Australia goes boo, I still reckon the Sri Lankans shudder. India don't. India are not intimidated by Australia's aura at all. But Sri Lanka, I still think that they wobble when Australia looks in their direction. Sometimes they had that series, they won 3-0, but generally speaking, I think, a little bit like New Zealand. I feel Australia's still got New Zealand in the head. Down the track, Australia will have to think about whether Travis Head is a test captain. Not right now, because Steve Smith's doing it, and then Pat Cummins comes back. But my question is, do you promote him, or do you just let Trav be Trav and say, mate, just as we thought of Doug Walters in the 70s, he's a guy who, free spirit, you just let him play, rocks and diamonds, likes the social side of the game without going silly. But do you want that guy as captain? Or do you think, no, it will eventually end up at Travis's door and he'll say, yes, I wrestle with it. What do you think?
So I was thinking about, they're going to have to name a captain for the Champions Trophy, aren't they? Is without Cummins, and now that Mitch Marsh is injured.
Yep.
And Steve Smith has just got such a grasp on the job at the moment that, so I reckon the initial inclination would have been, okay, let's choose the next white ball captain and give him the first exposure at it. I wouldn't do that now. I think just Smith is in such a good groove, and I think he's captained excellently every time he's needed to fill in for Cummins. I would let him do it, and I'm not usually this way inclined to kick that question down the road, but I would make Smith the captain of the Champions Trophy and leave that contemplation for another day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. Leaders can come from anywhere, though, can't they? That's what I like it. Like, I remember when it's Border Medal. Remember that time when Steve Smith couldn't get a date for the Border Medal? And who was it put it on social media? Someone having a bit of fun with him saying, can we find a date for this poor young guy called Steve Smith to the Border Medal? He's a really nice kid. He's no harm, And suddenly he became captain. I remember, Ricky Ponting was the young mischievous kid in the corner of the bar with the angular grin, who was always, he was just full of mischief and fun. And, he got there in the end. So, yeah, it's interesting. Future captains, you're never quite sure what's waiting down the track. But I can't make up a mind about Travis because I like the way there's an old-fashioned element to him.
Yeah.
When I was flying home, Gerard, I ran into Travis Head at the airport. And I said, what are you looking forward to the next couple of weeks? And he said, my club side tea tree Galle has got a reunion from a premiership of 20 years ago. And some of those boys I haven't seen might have been 10 years ago, I haven't seen for years. And he's cricket to his bootstraps, and I like that to him. And he's not a pretentious sort of guy, So he's got a bit going for him. And the fact that he's popular in the team, the other blokes like him. He's Switzerland in a way. Him and Mitch Marsh, the bowlers and the batsmen all like him.